What's going on, everyone? Cash Creatures here. And boy, does this market know how to put on a show. Today, we're going to be taking a look at some of the absolute insanity that's been taking place recently, and tracking the price movement of some high end slabs, and getting a good lay of the land of where we're at and where we can expect to go in the future in terms of price. So let's get right into it. So, of course, the big news story of this week is this Beckett Black Label Pristine 10 Mu EX, aka the Bubble Mu, going for almost $240,000 on auction at Golden. And pretty much everything that has to be said has already been said about this sale, but my 2 cents is that this is pretty much just unprecedented stuff here. We have an extremely low pop card. As you can see, it's only pop 2. To sell for this price, I mean, for this you can buy like a crazy souped out supercar. You could put a down payment on $1 million house. You could take care of your family for years and years. You know, you could travel all over the world, probably several times over. You could do so much with this kind of money, and to just spend it on a plastic slab of a card that Pokemon has printed thousands, if not millions of copies of, seems a little bit ridiculous. But just the fact that this card sold for this much is kind of a moment in history. I don't think we're going to see these kind of sales too often, so just take it for what it is. You know, try not to get too emotional about this, right? Don't have an emotional reaction over this. Just take it for what it is. This is where we're at in the hobby. People with big pockets are spending big money. You know, there's people out there with way more money than you and I could ever imagine, and they're spending it on stuff like this, right? Pop 2 copies of a Beckett Black Label. If that's what they want to spend their money on, that's what they want to spend their money on. And also, I found this post on Facebook of the alleged seller of this card. They sold it through the auction platform Golden, but the seller does appear to be Northwest Card Company. And as you can see here, they're showing payment confirmation of this card. So it does seem like this is a real sale that took place and payment was sent for this card. And if you look at the description of this post, these guys seem like kids, to be honest. They're acting like little children with this little SpongeBob style font. And, you know, they're also calling out the money laundering, market pumping, whatever allegations, right? You know, this could have been handled way more professionally. I think they could have just, you know, posted this and then been very grateful for the sale and maybe talked about what they plan to do with the money, how they plan to expand their business or give back to the community. Instead, we have more negativity being spread in the community, right? Even if it's not negativity, I mean, it's definitely rage bait, right? Nothing here is bringing out positive emotions from people. So again, this is kind of what the hobby's come to at this point. This is where we're at. Try not to have an emotional reaction to these kind of things. Just take it for face value, right? There was an extremely high sale on a Mew. That's what it is. You and I can't do anything about it. So just look at it in all and move on. And if we take a look at this Mu EX, right, getting away from the crazy Black Label prices, right, let's just take a look at the raw card and the PSA 10 prices. So this card, I have here the price chart, and we're looking at the raw price at the bottom and the PSA 10 price at the top, the orange line. And as you can see, this card is, of course, at an all-time high right now. It's selling for about $3,000, pretty consistently at $3,000. And it does look like recently it just had a big leg up. We had a period from pretty much August 2025 to February 2026 where the PSA 10 price did not move. And after that, we saw pretty much almost like a 50% to 75% increase within 3 months. So this is how fast these slabs can move, especially after a period of stagnation. And this is not a one-off scenario, right? Like if we look back at the history of this price, we go back to January 2025, and we see that from January 2025 to about July 2025, there was pretty much zero price movement on this card. Really, I would say until June 2025, and then it does look like it had about a 2x, really. It went from about $950 in a PSA 10 to about $1,900 in a PSA 10. So it took about 2 months for this card to 2x. And that's kind of the power of buying these PSA 10 copies when they stagnate for a period of time, right? Once that price consolidates for a while, that price memory starts kicking in, right? All the buyers who wanted to buy at this price have probably already bought, since there's been multiple months where it was at this price. And the sellers who have listed it have either already sold out or they're listing it now for higher prices, right? So that's kind of why we get this explosive growth after these periods of stagnation. And as we go through this video, you'll see that this is not an isolated thing. This is common across a lot of cards. We also have the Latias and Latios GX, the Lovebirds. And if we look at this card in a PSA 10, we have a similar thing going on here where it's pretty much just rocketed up recently. Looks like it's having another leg up. And this card is selling for about $16,000 to $17,500 right now, which is absolutely insane again. But the reason for that is because it's also been stagnating for quite a while. From July 2025 to April 2026, which is about 9 months of no growth, right? So following that period of consolidation and stagnation, if there's still high demand, all the sellers who have been listing at that price have already been wiped out. So this card naturally starts moving up in price. And this is not just a thing that's happening this year either, right? Like, as I mentioned, it happened last year in 2025, right? If we take a look even all the way back to 2023 for this card, in a PSA 10, it was sitting at about $2,600. And it actually was sitting there for about a year and 3 months, it looks like. Maybe even closer to a year and 5 months. It was consolidating in that range for a while, that $2,600 to $2,700 range. And then look what happened once demand started picking up. Again, this is when Surging Sparks was released. So maybe that Latias EX and Surging Sparks gave this card a little bit of a boost. Maybe it was just the hype train pushing everything up, right? Like a rising tide lifts all boats kind of thing. But from November 2024, it went from a price point of $2,700 all the way to pretty much $9,500 in July 2025. So in that 8-month period, I mean, you could say it almost 4x'd, right? Maybe 3.5x'd, which is absolutely insane, right? Those are insane gains. And then from there, it started stagnating again, as I mentioned, and then had another leg up. Another card from Team Up is this Gengar and Mimikyu. This card is seeing a very similar price chart to that Latias and Latios GX. Pretty much identical. Like if you put those price charts on top of each other, disregarding the actual price, but just looking at the price movement, we're looking at pretty much the same graph, right? So same patterns here. This card is currently selling for about $8,000 in a PSA 10. And if you picked it up in July of 2025, you could have got it for about half that price. So the question is, where do these cards go from here, right? This Gengar and Mimikyu GX just had a huge leg up, which means it could start stagnating for a while, or it could go even further, right? This card could go all the way to 10K before we see a period of stagnation again. And this Latias and Latios could go all the way to 20K, right? No one really knows. It's kind of pointless to try to time the top or time the bottom. But all you can do is when you see a period of stagnation like this for months, you have to be aware of these things happening, especially if you want to pick up this card. You have to be aware that this is happening and, try to save up some money and deploy some capital if you want this card, right? Or another card in a similar situation. For example, I really wanted this Gyarados EX. I've been wanting it for so long. In a PSA 10, I was okay with even a PSA 9. Really cool shining Gyarados with a Greninja and a Manaphy in it. I really like this artwork as well. It's by Mitsuhiro Arita, legendary artist, one of the OGs, right? And if we take a look at this PSA 10 price chart, looks like it has a similar pattern, not exactly the same, but, little period of consolidation and then a nice leg up. Currently, it's selling for about $3,000, almost $3,000. And, my time to buy in really would have been last year, around December 2025. I did not pull the trigger, and now we're nearly twice as expensive as we were just like 6 months ago, right? So I might have missed the boat on this guy. Maybe I'll still look for a PSA 9. But again, what I'm looking for at this point, I'm keeping my eyes peeled, and I'm looking for those periods of stagnation over several months and, looking to deploy some capital when I see those patterns, right? Also taking a look at the Mega Rayquaza EX, also from the XY era. This card, another huge leg up. This PSA 10 price is actually selling for over $10,000. It's a pretty expensive card. Back in August 2025, it was sitting at about 2/3 of the current market value. And then it kind of fell all the way down to right under $5,000, maybe even $4,500. And then since that December 2025 low, it's actually more than doubled since then. So another example of where we have that consolidation pattern and then we break out of it and just head for the hills. So now let's take a look at more modern cards. The ones I've just shown recently are more kind of like low pop, you could say. But with this Umbreon VMAX, we're definitely not low pop, right? We're sitting at about 20,000 plus PSA 10 copies. And if we take a look at what this card's doing in a PSA 10, it is rising as well as the raw price. This card in a PSA 10 is sitting for about $4,200. We can see recent sales are about that $4,100 to $4,300 range. There were a few sales in that $4,500 to $4,600 range not too long ago, but it does look like this card isn't ready to break past that price point just yet. And this card, since it's so liquid, we don't see those like concrete patterns as much. You know, it might stagnate for like 2-3 months and then have like a leg up, right? 2-3 months, then have a leg up. And I think it's just because this card is traded over so many more times, right? There's so much more sales volume on this. This Umbreon VMAX is exchanging hands way quicker than those other low pop cards. So that time frame of consolidation might be a bit compressed for cards such as this. But still, we see a similar pattern. We have a few months of consolidation and then we break up a little bit. That's kind of what I'm noticing when it comes to PSA 10 prices. And if we take a look at the Umbreon EX from Prismatic Evolutions, this time frame looks a little bit weird because it hasn't been out for that long, right? But again, we have some periods of slight drawdown, consolidation, leg up, right? Consolidation, leg up. And this card is currently selling for about $5,500. I do think if you do want to buy this card, maybe wait till it gets to the low 5,000s, maybe like 52 to 5,100. That would be an ideal buying point. I don't think this card is just going to keep rocketing up, right? Especially with so many other options out there on the market. I don't know if anyone's really super pressed about the Crown Umbreon just yet. And I am a little bit surprised actually that this is more valuable than the Evolving Skies Umbreon. Personally, I think the Evolving Skies Umbreon looks way better and is just way more iconic, right? Like everybody talks about this card. Not really many people talk about this card, right? It's just not as much of an icon in my opinion. But again, this is all just my opinion. Now taking a look at an ultra modern card, we have the Mega Charizard EX, right? So this is from Phantasmal Flames. This card has not been out for that long. And what we see now is that I think supply is finally catching up to the demand for this card and some other cards, which I'll be showing in a second. Because for the first time, we're seeing an actual price decline on this card for the past few months, right? Because this card was selling at about that $2,700 price point pretty consistently over the past few months. And now it does look like it's coming down just a bit. Last sale was $2,600, before that $2,500. And before that, it was $2,700, almost $2,900. Right? We even have some sales up in the 3,000s, right? If you're a big baller and want to waste some money, right? So I do think this card is probably going to settle in that 2,500 price point. Maybe it'll touch like 2,400 for a bit. I don't know if it'll come down too much lower than that. If it does, you know, that's definitely your time to get in there. I don't think this card is going to be down for too long. This is also a super liquid card. It's getting traded multiple times a day, you know, at these different vending shows and eBay and, you know, whatnot and all these other things, right? So I do think that consolidation time frame is going to be a bit compressed. So if this PSA 10 starts consolidating for another month or so, I would say honestly pick it up. Again, I do agree that this is one of the most iconic Charizard cards we've had of all time, and I do think the artwork is amazing. It does have Charmander, Charmeleon, and Charizard in there, along with a sick black and blue Charizard. Amazing artwork, right? This is a super iconic card. I personally do not have it in my collection yet, and I'm also looking to pick it up soon. So pretty much what I just told you guys, you know, try to look for it in that low $2,400, $2,500 range. That's exactly what I'm going to be doing as well. And taking a look at some other ultra modern cards. This is ultra modern. This Pikachu EX from Ascended Heroes. This card is very clearly declining in price in a PSA 10. Price charting shows that the peak for this card in a PSA 10 was $4,200. It was absolutely not. I saw a lot of people buying this card for almost $5,000. There was probably even some $5,000 sales. I don't know if there's any shown here on eBay, but we definitely see some in the high 4,000s. Right? Like if you go back maybe like a month ago, This card was definitely selling in the high 4,000s. Now it does look like it's pretty consistently down in the mid threes, right? We have 3,600, 3,600, 3,550, 3,650. So I do think this card is settling down a little bit, especially with more Ascended Heroes product coming out and, more people getting their subs back from PSA. It's just a matter of time before this card starts declining a bit more, honestly. I don't think we've seen the trough just yet, the bottom of the kind of wave just yet. I do think this card is going to continue declining a bit more. Maybe that $3,200 price point, $3,200 to $3,400, seems like a good buy-in point for this card. This is another card I do want in a PSA 10. So really important that, for anyone else who does as well, make sure you're buying at the best entry point possible. And if you miss it, you miss it. It's all good, right? Like, you can't get everything. You literally cannot catch them all in this game. And if you try to, you will go insane. So protect your capital and make smart decisions. If we take a look at the Mega Gengar EX from this set, exact same pattern pretty much. This card was selling for over $4,000 all day. And now we are back to the, looks like $3,200 price point. There's a sale at $37, but mostly around that $3,200 to $3,300 price point. I think this card could touch $3,000. If you want to buy this card at $3,000, I don't think it's that bad of a deal. I do think that's probably an optimal buy-in point, especially if you can find it within the next 1 to 2 months around that price point. I do think it'll kind of consolidate there. Hopefully you'll get some good buying opportunities in that range. And the reason these cards are dropping so much, as I just mentioned, I kind of alluded to, but there is more Ascended Heroes supply hitting the market, right? So more packs being opened, more cards being pulled, more cards being sent to PSA. At one point, I think there was only like 100. I remember there was like 100 PSA 10s of that Pikachu EX, right? Now we're at over 2,000 Gem Mint 10s. And this is not a hard card to grade either, right? So almost a 70% gem rate. I think those factors combined are kind of leading to the price decline of this card. I've also seen I've seen a lot of supply of this card hit the market recently. So again, a lot of people probably getting their submissions back from PSA. So just keep your eyes peeled. I think within the next few months might be a good time to start buying these cards finally. It was not a good time to buy them, within the past 2 to 3 months. But over the next 2 to 3 months, I think we might see some opportunities. So keep your eyes peeled. Similarly for the Gengar, right? This Gengar now has over 3,000 PSA 10 copies out there. And again, almost a 67% gem rate. So not very hard cards to grade. Maybe you can try to find some raw copies yourself and grade them if you're, a risk taker and you want to try to save some money as well. Otherwise, I do think if you can find this card maybe at like a $2,800 to $3,000 price point, I think that's a good buy-in point. All right, now taking a look at some Sword and Shield alt arts, we have the Lugia V. And I know this card has been seeing a lot of interest recently. It looks like back in December 2025 at the lows, it was sitting at about $850 for a PSA 10. And now it's over $1,500 for a PSA 10. So maybe about 80% gain since that trough of December 2025. And again, we have very similar consolidation patterns for this card, right? All the way back in 2024, we had a several month period of consolidation, little 50% run up there, another few month period of consolidation, run up, dip, consolidation, run up, right? So the chart isn't going to always look exactly the same, but you have to know what to look for in terms of, when to sell, when to buy. I do think with PSA 10s, it is easier to time the market. Of course, timing the exact top, timing the exact bottom is not a very viable strategy. But if you do want to buy this card at a good price and you want to sell it at a good price, I do think there are ways to do that in an efficient manner. And the Dragonite V from Evolving Skies, very cool card. Looks like we are sitting at about $1,350 in a PSA 10. Recent sales around that exact price point actually. And December 2025 of last year, we were at about $800 for a PSA 10. The Giratina V from Lost Origin, Shinji Kaneda artwork, very cool. This card has been going bananas in a PSA 10. Right now we're sitting at over $3,000. Last sales, $3,000, $3,100, $3,200. Yeah, it does look like we're at $3,100 actually. I would say that's a fair price point for this card. December 2025 of last year, we were about $1,800. So we're almost at a 2x since 6 months ago. I do think for this card, it's probably going to consolidate for quite a bit. I don't see it really blowing past like 3,000, 3,500 anytime soon, right? So at least like I would expect maybe a 3 to 4 month period of consolidation for this card around that $3,000 to $3,200 price point before, we really start pushing up into the $3,500, $4,000 range. Taking a look at the Gengar VMAX from Fusion Strike, this card is sitting at about $2,700 in a PSA 10. December 2025 of last year, it was about $1,650, you could say. And I think for this card, I do think $2,700 honestly is not a terrible price point to buy in. If you can find it at like a $2,500 to $2,600 price point, that would obviously be much better. But the thing is, this card was at $2,200 almost a whole year ago. So I don't know how low we're going to go on this card. This card could definitely be like a $3,600 card in a PSA 10 within the next year or so. So maybe looking for this card at like a $2,700 price point would not be such a bad idea. And then for some of the more affordable options, we have the Tyranitar IR from Paldea Evolved. In a raw copy, this card is not very expensive at all. It's about 60 to 70 bucks. And in a PSA 10, this goes for about 650 to 700 because this card is extremely hard to grade. So that's why it has that about like 8 to 10x multiplier on a PSA 10. It does look like this card has been going up pretty consistently. I do think we'll see some stagnation around this price point at the $650 to $700 price range. Let's say maybe 3 to 6 months of stagnation, and then we go up to about $1,000. That's something I would expect. Of course, these markets are super hard to predict. I'm not trying to say that anything is going to happen for sure, but that's a likely inference that we can make. And then looking at the Groudon IR from Paradox Rift, in a raw copy, this card is going for about $120 right now. So this card's finally kind of breaking that $100 price point. And in a PSA 10, it's sitting at about $600, $610, you could say. It's a bit easier to grade than that Tyranitar V, but not by that much. Looks like back in December of 2025, we came all the way down to $350, which would have been a great buy-in point. Since then, we're about 60 to 70% up. So not too bad at all. And then taking a look at the Gardevoir EX, this is actually right now the top chase hit of Scarlet Violet base. Yet this card is only like a $220 to $230 card in a PSA 10. And for this one, this is not a super in-demand, high-demand card, right? So what we'll see here is we see these periods of stagnation, but then we see a very small leg up, right? Like this is like a 2x, right? And that was during the initial hype wave with Surging Sparks and Prismatic Evolutions, both releasing around the same time. But after that, we stagnated for a few months, came back up to about, not that much higher than the previous high. And then we stagnated, and then we came back up, pretty much matched the previous high, and didn't do much else. So this card, I am a fan of the artwork and the story behind this card. And I do think it could do well long term. But it really just depends on how much demand we get into these Scarlet and Violet era PSA 10s, right? I do have faith in this card. Gardevoir is a pretty popular Pokemon as well. And to close this video out, we'll take a look at the Team Rocket's Mewtwo EX from Destined Rivals. This card, it peaked in September 2025, actually, of last year, around that $2,000 price point. And I guess that was a few months after Destined Rivals released. So there was a lot of hype back then and, very few PSA 10 copies on the market. This card came down all the way to about $1,100. I think you could even find copies for like $1,000, $1,050 at one point. And now it's sitting at about $1,500, right? We see some recent sales around $1,300 to $1,500. So maybe $1,450 is a more fair price on this card. I actually do have faith in this card long term. And I think maybe another month or two of stagnation, and we could see this card actually approaching that $1,800 to $2,000 price point. So time will tell, but I am a fan of this card. We don't get too many cards with Mewtwo and Giovanni both. And I know this card was initially hated on a lot. I think people were let down by the art on this card. But, looking back, I think people start to appreciate it a bit more, especially the color scheme. I do think the color palette on this card is absolutely sick. So yeah, I'm a fan, and I do think this card's going to do well long term. But yeah, that's all I got today, guys. I hope you got some value out of this video. Again, try not to have any emotional reactions to all these price hikes that are happening recently. It's not good for your mental health, and it's not good for your longevity in the hobby, right? And, as great investors always say, time in the market beats timing the market, right? So if you can just master patience and, careful analysis based on, pattern recognition, right? That's really all you need to do in this hobby to find things at good prices. So just keep that in mind, keep a level head, always be cool and composed, and try not to let anything rattle you, right? So yeah, that's all I got, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.